Imagine you haven't eaten in 2 days. You know exactly where the herd is. You tracked it yesterday. You found the prints. You mapped the route in your head. And now, all you have to do is get there. And then it starts raining. Not a light drizzle. A heavy, soaking wind-driven rain that doesn't stop. It goes all day, then all night. Then the next morning, and it's still going. So now you can't hunt. You can't see tracks because the mud's washed them away. You can't move through the open because wet ground and bare feet on rocky terrain means a twisted ankle. And a twisted ankle out here means death. The river near your camp is rising. And the fire, the one thing keeping you warm, keeping predators away, and keeping you alive, is now starting to struggle. You're not bored. You're trapped. For most of human history, rain wasn't an inconvenience. It was a crisis. And what ancient humans did during that crisis might be more important than anything they did on a clear day. Today, when it rains, you shut the window, brew some coffee, maybe grab a blanket, and open Netflix. You sink into the couch, wiggle into that perfect spot, and just let go. For you, rain is background noise. It makes you calm, makes you sleepy, maybe even a little nostalgic. You might not even finish the episode before you're out cold. But for a human being 50,000 years ago, that exact same sound you're dozing off to could kill you in 3 separate ways before it even stopped. The first is cold. A wet human loses body heat up to 25 times faster than a dry one. Without clothing, without waterproof shelter, a long rainstorm in anything below about 50 F could drop your core temperature into hypothermia range within hours. And most of the world our ancestors lived in got that cold at night, even in Africa, at higher elevations during the wet season. The second is flooding. Caves and rock shelters, the main places humans lived, usually sit at the base of hillsides or right next to rivers, so heavy rain meant flash floods. Archaeologists have found layers of flood sediment inside occupied caves, proof that water poured in while people were still living there. Some of those layers are thick enough that the caves were never used again. The third, maybe the worst, is predators. Rain pushes animals toward shelter too, and sometimes that shelter was the exact cave you were already hiding in. There are cave sites in South Africa where human remains and large cat remains turn up together in the same layers. Some of those human skulls carry puncture marks that match leopard teeth perfectly. So rain didn't just make life uncomfortable, it compressed the entire world down into one space. Humans, predators, and prey all forced into the same small, dry shelter, waiting out the same storm together. And in the middle of all that, one job mattered above everything else, keeping the fire alive. Here's why that was so genuinely terrifying. Before roughly 40,000 years ago, we're not even sure how reliably humans could start a fire from nothing at all. There's evidence of controlled fire use stretching back at least 400,000 years at a site called Kesem Cave in Israel, and possibly close to 1,000,000 years at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. But controlling a fire that already exists and creating a brand new one from scratch are two completely different skills, and for most of human history, most people probably couldn't do the second one at all. So if your fire went out, there was a real chance you might not be able to relight it. You'd have to carry an ember in from somewhere else. And some groups genuinely did this, transporting smoldering coals wrapped in green leaves, or packed inside a type of woody fungus called tinder fungus that could hold a spark and smolder for hours on its own. It was basically a biological lighter, and we know this wasn't guesswork. When Ötzi the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old body preserved in the Alps, was found, he was carrying a complete fire-starting kit in his belt pouch: tinder fungus, flint iron pyrite for striking sparks, and backup plant tinder. Even 5,000 years ago, losing your fire was serious enough that people carried dedicated gear to prevent it. So when the rain hit, the fire came first, before shelter, before anything. Move it deeper into the cave. Shield it with hides or brush. Feed it carefully, not too much, not too little. Look for dead lower branches on coniferous trees, the ones still shielded by the canopy above, usually still dry underneath. Split open wet logs to reach the dry wood at the core. Use birch bark for kindling, since birch contains a chemical called betulin that burns even when wet. One person's entire job during a storm might just be sitting beside that fire for hours, feeding it, shielding it, making sure it never died, because that fire was everything. It was warmth, light, safety, cooked food, and the center of every social moment the group had. Letting it go out wasn't careless. It could be fatal for the whole group. Find the fire's holding, you're mostly dry, but you still can't leave. So what do? You build things. The archaeological record is unambiguous here. Caves and rock shelters are stacked with evidence of manufacturing. Stone tools at every stage of production. Piles of flaking debris, the tiny chips that fly off while shaping a tool concentrated in specific spots. Exactly where someone would sit near the firelight and work for hours. And it wasn't only stone. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered a 100,000-year-old ochre workshop abalone shells used as mixing bowls, ochre ground carefully into powder, bone tools used to stir and apply it. This wasn't basic survival. This was production, a full working system someone ran while rain likely pounded outside for hours. Then there are bone needles, which start showing up in the record around 61,000 years ago in South Africa, and later across Europe and Asia, delicate, precise little tools with tiny drilled eyes. Nobody makes a bone needle while running from something dangerous. You make it sitting still, focused, with hours of quiet time to spare. Rainy days handed people exactly that kind of time. Here's where it gets even more interesting. At a Neanderthal site called Abri du Maras in France, archaeologists found a tiny fragment of twisted plant fiber string dating back roughly 52,000 years, the oldest direct evidence of string ever recovered. And at Hohlfels Cave in Germany, they found a 35,000-year-old tool carved from mammoth ivory, with 4 holes and spiral grooves built specifically for twisting plant fibers into rope. Someone sat down and carved a dedicated rope-making machine. Making rope is slow, repetitive, and demands patience, the perfect bad weather task. And rope changed everything. It let you bind things together, build sturdier shelters, set snares and traps, and attach tools to handles. A huge share of human technology runs on string, and string was almost certainly invented by someone stuck inside, waiting for the rain to quit. It wasn't just tools and rope, either. People were also making their shelters livable. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found something nobody expected from 77,000 years ago: actual bedding. Layers of sedges, rushes, and grasses arranged deliberately as sleeping mats, with a top layer of leaves from a plant called Cape Laurel, a natural insect repellent. Someone wasn't just surviving in that cave, they were making it livable, making it home. The bedding was even burned and replaced periodically to keep it clean. 77,000 years ago, people were already doing pest control. But here's where the story turns somewhere nobody expects. All of that, the tools, the rope, the bedding, is the practical side. What comes next is something else entirely: art. Chauvet Cave in southern France holds paintings roughly 36,000 years old lions, horses, rhinos, bears, rendered with a level of skill and observation that still stuns people today. The artists understood anatomy, motion, perspective. Some animals are captured mid-stride, muscles tensed, heads turning. These aren't scribbles. They're the work of people who studied these animals for thousands of hours and then recreated them from memory, deep underground, by firelight. Chauvet isn't alone either. Lascaux, Altamira, and Sulawesi in Indonesia, where cave art dates back at least 45,000 years, making it the oldest known figurative art on Earth. And here's the detail that makes this fascinating. These paintings aren't near the cave entrance where you'd actually shelter. They're deep, sometimes hundreds of meters, through narrow passages. In chambers, you'd have to crawl to reach. Someone carried an animal fat lamp into total darkness just to paint. Think about that. Nobody does this when the weather's perfect and the hunting is good. You do it when you can't go outside, when the rain's been falling for 2 days, you've already sharpened every tool you own. And there's nothing left to do but go deeper into the dark and make something. We can't prove cave art was strictly a rainy day activity, but the logic holds up. The biggest creative explosion in human prehistory happened in exactly the places where people were most likely to be trapped inside for long stretches. And that leads somewhere even bigger. Rain may not have just produced art, it may have produced culture itself in a fairly direct way. Think about what actually happens when 15 to 30 people get stuck together in a confined space for days on end with nothing to do. You talk. You listen. You share what you know. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study comparing daytime conversations to nighttime, fireside conversations among the Juhuansi Bushmen of the Kalahari. During the day, people mostly discussed practical matters, land rights, resources, complaints, but at night, gathered around the fire, over 80% of conversation shifted towards stories, songs, and ceremony instead. The firelight itself seemed to change what people talked about it, softened faces, eased tension, opened people up in ways daylight didn't. The campfire wasn't just warmth, it was the original social network. And what got shared around that fire wasn't small talk, it was survival. Where water sources dry up in summer, which plants are safe to eat, where the best flint deposits sit, how to track a specific animal. That's not gossip. That's critical knowledge moving from one brain to another through pure speech. Beyond the practical side, there were also stories, myths, explanations for why rain falls and where it goes. Every ancient culture on Earth has rain mythology, and somebody invented those stories almost certainly while sitting in the exact situation the story was trying to explain. Here's something that shows just how powerful that storytelling really was. The oldest oral traditions ever verified against real geological events are Australian Aboriginal stories describing sea level changes from roughly 7,000 years ago. Those stories survived 7,000 years on nothing but people repeating them to each other. That kind of cultural memory doesn't form unless groups spend enormous stretches of time doing exactly that, sitting together, retelling the same stories again and again. So rainy days weren't dead time. They were transmission time, the days when knowledge passed from old to young, when skills got taught through demonstration, when the group's shared memory got reinforced and updated. Now here's the part almost nobody mentions. Rain wasn't always bad news. Sometimes it was the best possible break. After heavy rain, the ground turns soft, and soft ground means perfect tracks, deep, clear, detailed. You can tell exactly which animals passed, how long ago, how fast, and where they were headed. Some of the best tracking conditions on Earth show up right after rain stops. Rain also meant water. Humans could collect and store it, and even early hominins likely understood this. Rock depressions that fill with clean water during rain turn up near almost every known prehistoric campsite, and some show signs of being deliberately carved deeper to hold more. Water wasn't the only bonus, either. Mushrooms and certain plants surge after rain. Tubers pull easier out of wet soil. Insects surface. A rainy stretch didn't shut down the food supply, it just changed its shape. And the groups who understood that shift had a real advantage over the ones who didn't. Termites are the clearest example. They swarm after rain across tropical Africa, and they're one of the most protein-dense foods around. No tools needed, no weapons, you just scoop them up. Chimpanzees today still gorge on termite swarms right after rainstorms, and early humans almost certainly did the same, probably at a much bigger scale. So what did ancient humans actually do when it rained all day? Everything that mattered. They kept the fire alive. They built the tools they'd need for the next hunt. They stitched the clothing that would carry them through winter. They twisted the rope that would hold their shelters together. They ground the pigment they'd later use to paint animals on cave walls, deep underground. They told the stories that would carry survival knowledge across generations. And once the rain finally broke, they stepped back outside onto soft ground covered in perfect animal tracks and got straight back to work. Rain never actually slowed them down. If anything, it gave them time to prepare for everything that came after it. Every tool, every stitch of clothing, every story, every painting on a cave wall, all of it traces straight back to downtime. To the hours and days they couldn't step outside and had nothing left to do but sit by a fire and think. Boredom simply didn't exist for them the way it exists for you, because when you're sitting in a cave with rain hammering outside and your survival depends entirely on what your hands can make in the next few hours, boredom isn't an option on the table. You get creative instead. And that might be the single biggest reason we're still here.